Welcome everyone to the fourth episode of Finance Unplugged Expert Talks interview series. Today we have a guest who has a wide range of experience in risk management and risk consulting. I'm pleased to welcome Nivetha to this episode, and I'll let her introduce herself, and then we can take it from there.
Thanks, Rupul. It's great to be among the audience today, and thanks for the invite. I'm Nivetha. I have about 10 years of experience, and I'm currently a senior manager in Accenture Strategy and Consulting. My specialist area is risk management, and I have exposure across credit risk, treasury risk, and a whole variety of risks coming under consulting domain. We could unpack a lot of that today, but very excited to be among the audience today.
Thank you. Thanks for your introduction. And we are all looking forward to gain industry insights from you. So to get started, what does your typical day-to-day life at work look like? What are the things that you work on? What are the challenges that you tackle on a daily basis? We would, really appreciate something about that.
Right. So at my workplace, client is at the center of all work we do. So on any given day, I'm challenged by the client problems and breaking it down in structures and delivering value to the client in whatever way or form it looks like, right? Given my specialty is in risk, some days it could be heavy on analytical, basically me understanding what the problem is. That involves a whole lot of preparation work on what are the right questions to ask, how long do I even have a key stakeholder's time? And then going back to my drawing board to analyze some of those along with my team. And then by the end of that whole small piece of engagement, I might end up finding those right solutions that are required to help the client problem solve, right? A good part of my day also goes around helping my team members understand what pieces of work they can own and drive independently and putting it together as part of a solution that can be presented to the client.
Understood. That's great. That sounds really exciting. Seems like a lot of things are going on all together for you on a typical day. So please share a little bit more about the kind of projects, some technical details. What kind of projects do you tackle, and what are the turnaround times expected by the client? How does that, fit into the big picture of things in terms of monthly or quarterly targets for you and for the team?
Sure. So from the perspective of type of projects, like I said, I work for Accenture. The company itself, the word Accenture is two-part word, accent into the future. In our DNA is looking at technology as the lever to solve problems. So in the risk world, when you're encountered with a problem, especially one at scale, the thinking hats go on for us to think about how to leverage technology and help unbox the problem and help the client solution. So unlike what somebody might typically think about as consulting, which is somebody's just giving advice, right? What's special about the sort of consulting we do, which we call a strategy and consulting specialist within risk, is we walk through the journey with the client, right from identifying a problem all the way till implementation, right? So I've called out that technology is key, but do I need to know all sorts of technology? Not really. It's the frame of mind in how you can solve problems. So the projects could range anywhere in the area of risk, starting with any financial risk, which is like super technical, super core, super analytical, and mathematical in nature, things like your credit risk, market risk, etc. Or it could be in what you otherwise call as your non-financial risk area, your third-party risk, your operational resilience, cybersecurity, market conduct risk, regulatory compliance, so on and so forth. So to be very honest, if I were to reflect back on my career and risk as an area, most of this became very formalized due to Basel, right? None of the set of audience we're speaking to are new to them, but just a quick story in history, right? So it all began in about 95, 98, sorry, 75, 78. We know where the Basel story all began. But since then, the key risk areas that were focused on were credit, and then came market at around 1996. Obviously, because what's the core job of a bank? It's to lend money and make profits as a consequence of lending. Lending is all about credit, right? So the regulations in credit, the experience and expertise in credit has by now matured a lot, which is sort of why you feel that today when anyone says risk, the first thing they think about is credit. And in that same sequence, the second one that comes is market. And probably third and almost understood as a catch-all today is operational risk, right? Because that's how
Yeah.
Basel looks at the pillars.
Yeah.
But after 2008, which is when we had your GFC, all other risks sort of started becoming relevant in a day-to-day business scenario of the bank, and they started emerging beyond just the definitions of regulatory compliance. What do I mean? Banks or companies no longer do projects just because the regulator is asking for something. It's not because the policeman is behind me. There are also other value we are able to unlock by effectively managing risk, which means a risk manager within the industry or consulting is no longer just the police or a gatekeeper. He becomes an ally with you in business to making sure you do it right, you do it responsibly, and you do it sustainably. So, a whole lot of other risk areas in the non financial area are what are catching up today. And there is a lot of interest, especially in how can we get ahead of the game there, which is where tooling also starts playing a big difference. So, to summarize, your traditional risk areas are great, they're technical, they're analytical. There's a whole lot of math that goes behind it, which is great, but they're also mature today in terms of the journey that's been taken, in terms of the regulatory expectation, in terms of the journey banks have also come through, right? So if I were looking for the new, that's may not be where there's too much of new. The regulations and the expectations are stricter, more incremental, and the regulatory lens is getting alignment and a level playing field across countries, jurisdictions, and banks. However, where the more exciting stuff today is actually happening is in the non financial risk space, which is much less defined, a lot more exploratory, and various other areas keep cropping up, which is what we call as evolving risk areas, right?
Yeah.
More recently, you would have heard about your crypto risks, your climate risk, your ESG reporting, etc., right? Putting all of that together, why is it exciting to be where I work, what I do, and risk consulting as an area? Is you get to be as a part of that new. You get to shape the thinking of how the industry is supposed to even approach, even when the regulatory expectations itself are quite broad and non standardized as it stands today.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, you raise a couple of points which we have been also observing, in the literature that has been floating around on different platforms. And it's great that you mentioned how the technology and the regulatory expectation tie into what's in store for the future. While also mentioning things like climate risk. That's also an important topic of discussion. My next question to you is, how do you see a blend of technology and the regulatory expectations that are there, playing a role in shaping of what's expected from the candidate? A
Mhm.
successful candidate in your field, what kind of skill sets do you think are most desired to solve a problem end to end for the kind of problem statements that you are receiving from the clients?
Got it. So I really like the phrasing that you put through, right? Technology influences regulatory thinking. Regulatory thinking influences technology. It's a never-ending loop, okay?
Yeah.
There are some areas in risk today which became an area only because of technology. Think about cyber risk,
Yeah.
cyber crime, fraud risk, cross-border trades, the whole lot of things that happen. They're all because of technology enabling something to happen, right? On the other end, there is also a lot of regulatory push to adopt technology in some areas because banks have really not been proactive. Think about the likes of your BCBS 239 or how banks handle data. Everywhere today, when we talk about, it's all about AI, right? Artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
But at its fabric, at its core, is how do you handle data? Okay, let's leave that
Absolutely.
point aside for a moment. To answer your second part of the question and link it to what we just discussed about as to how can candidates prepare themselves for the future, right? In my line of business, the top most important thing is curiosity and the ability to think from first principles. I can never teach something to you today that will forever remain relevant. In less than a year, it's irrelevant. Okay. I've had a journey of more than 10 years now. Most of the things I studied are relevant from its theoretical perspective, but in its application have evolved so much that sometimes I'm looking at myself, even shaping the thinking of what it means. So, what is fundamental to my success or to any consultant's success over the period of their growth is ability to keep challenging and keep thinking. For me to do that effectively is when technology starts becoming an amplifier. So I'm also going to get the cat out of the bag. Is AI going to take my job away, right? So let's get to that in a moment. But an ideal candidate in risk consulting has to aspire to be equal parts an original and a critical thinker, but can pair it with very strong analytical skills based on the theory and academics he learns. So a typical person will be one who goes beyond just the textbooks to ask those questions on why exactly did this happen. Let me give you an example. So you're studying great financial crisis, okay?
Yeah.
The first thing I hear from candidates when I ask about it is subprime crisis, right? And then they go into giving me an explanation of securitization, this, that, etc. The moment I ask the third question of what exactly do you mean? Can you draw me an analogy? I'm a 5-year-old. How do you explain? They start finding it difficult. In other words, do you understand at the core what it is? What exactly happened? Who is a subprime? Very simply put, you lent it to someone who was not good enough to lend because everybody felt lending is the thing to do, right?
Yeah.
A 5-year-old will understand every word that I used. So, are you able to resist explaining something without its jargon is core? The second is somebody to even question, is that all that happened? Were there not other implications? Right? That's what I mean by critical thinking. And the third is analytical. What did the numbers say? How did this impact the world? How did we find out what are the problems to fix? How painful was this journey, and how did regulators across the globe react and make sure they didn't have to face the situation tomorrow? Right? So that's one of the key parts of what we do. Understand what the problem is, not be afraid to ask questions, but make sure you're asking the right questions and applying your thinking hats to see why something makes sense or not. The fact that
Understood.
this is the core of the business really means technical expertise and domain knowledge is only one part of the story. The second part is your ability to engage with people, make your solutions accessible, and bring stakeholders on your journey in problem solving. Now, coming to the third part, right? Is AI really going to take my job? The way I look at AI, and almost everybody in my firm and most of the other places today, it's a challenger, of course. So, just as any challenge, it's up to you to react to it. Do you react with fear or do you react with excitement? Right? In my own lens, personally, I look at AI as an amplifier. If something took me 3 days and a set of 4 people to get simple answers to high level answers, right? We're not talking about 100% accuracy here, but to guide my initial thinking, I'm able to do that with the AI partner in less than 20 minutes. But what should I be good at? I should be good at communicating with that tool, right? Asking it the right things, which is going back to the skills I was talking about a moment back, right? Do I know to interact with the tool in a way that I can get it to give me answers that I need today and for my client problems, right? The articulation, especially as a consultant, becomes really important because you have a very fine balance to strike. You are not allowed to cross the boundaries of client data protection,
Yeah.
right? However, I also need my thinking to be challenged. So it's almost like having a partner who helps me think, who challenges me real time and prepares me better to face the heat in front of the client.
Understood. No, that's really great. And I really liked how you explained the role of AI, right? I believe that AI is what you make of it, right? And that's where prompt engineering, in fact, some people use that word because it's about utilizing your learning to design a prompt that can give you your output in the shortest possible duration, right? In general. Now, some of the things that you mentioned, right? I am trying to create a bridge here, which is you mentioned that having conceptual clarity is the most important thing. Like, right, like having the knowledge is one thing, but how is that knowledge being applied to solve a problem statement? In what way that is applied? Because you need to optimize for time and efficiency as well, right? I think that's most important. The bridge I want to create here is for example, like you are CFA and FRM. If anyone is preparing for, let's say, CFA or even FRM, how should they be approaching the preparation, right? Such that they are clearing their concepts more than just focusing on getting a certification.
Right.
With this, one more question
Mm-hmm.
is, do you think the certification in itself holds a lot of value, or it is what the certification makes you that matters the most?
Got it. Very pertinent questions to ask, right? And I'd like to start with two things. One, my own personal journey. And two, along the way of my journey, I've also been a mentor to all of CFA and FRM folks. So one of the other questions, and I'll throw it out there, is
Yeah,
which one do I do, right? So let's try and answer all of them together, but I'm not going to
great.
break it into pieces, okay?
Yeah,
The first one, I began my journey of CFA because I was bored,
okay.
right? I needed a structured way to learn something more, right? And I
Yeah,
wanted to be challenged, simple as that. But the moment I did level one, I started to say, okay, why should I not go the full run? Right? Let me learn some more. Let me learn some more. So for me, the pure goal was learning. I just wanted to know more and I wanted to know enough. Okay. It was not with any vested interest of I'm behind this job for which CFA or FRM or any other certificate in the world is pertinent. Okay. I'd like to challenge that way of thinking that candidates today typically have. If I do this, will I get that? Not really, but it sets you with the minimums that's required. So it becomes a hygiene factor.
yeah,
Okay. It gives you a structured way of knowing the things that you ought to know to even get a chance of a foot through your door, right? Let's be honest, we are in a very competitive world. It's always been so, all the more in India, right?
yeah.
So then I'm constantly in a lookout for finding a way to distinguish myself from others. So, in your context, any candidate, aspiring candidate who's listening to this, in your own context, if a CFA is going to be an edge vis-a-vis some of your peers, you should certainly explore. But in my view, the best and the purest purpose for doing any of these should be it intrinsically drives you. You just like to learn, which means CFA is not the only way. Suppose there's something around, I don't know, I'm making this up. You saw the movie Big Shot, okay?
Yes.
You were super interested on what exactly is happening, who is trading it, or I've heard many stories of people who caught on trading after Wall Street Journal, right? Some of the best learning and the best people that I have met are self-taught. You really do it for a purpose because it drives you. It comes from a positive place of drive. Okay. So just to sum that up, if I do CFA, will I get the job? If I do FRM, will I get that job? No. But you're better prepared to talk during an interview for the sort of things a person is expecting out of you. Right. So now that we've established that alone is not enough, what is enough? Like I mentioned a while back, you need to find a part of your unique identity. And that usually comes from what's your area of interest. Don't be afraid to keep exploring, right? Especially early on in your career. Having worked in risk, I have a way of looking at the world in risk. Okay, so I'm going to make this statement. The
Yeah,
biggest risk that you have is not taking any risk.
absolutely.
Because if you don't take, anyways, it's going to come and it's going to hit you. Okay,
Yeah,
the way we all feel, for example, is inflation. Even if you keep enough money, it's always going to eat you up. The same with your career, right? And personally, I've done that a lot. When I began just as any other person. I had no idea about an area called risk management. So my own story goes, I was fresh out of campus, aspiring for investment banking, simply because it pays the best, and all the top people went there. I could reasonably handle people interactions, and I was reasonably analytical. I could challenge myself. Simple. So I thought I was a good fit for investment banking. So here's a personal detour. I never got into investment banking, but it's not because I didn't get through the interviews. I made a choice to not even sit for the interviews. And it's because I had an understanding that those are jobs that's going to need 20, 22, 24 hours, which means you need physical endurance, not just mental. And knowing myself, it's not one I'm ever going to enjoy, right? I like variety in life.
yeah,
Investment banking also makes you very focused. At least this is what I knew when I began, right? And then I said, fine, let me explore something, and I kept it open. Then came an equally demanding field, such as consulting. And an equally analytical area called risk. What do I mean by analytical? A lot of things in our world run with numbers. People
Yeah.
understand numbers sometimes better than languages, right? You tell them alpha, beta, surprisingly, they understand that. But some of the words that we speak, they may not, right? So, welcome to the world of risk.
Yeah.
So, I began as a novice. I had no idea. Began in the world of treasury. I did not know what was treasury, except for that, it has to do with money, it has to do with numbers. People pull up coffers and all those academic things, right? Your interest rate reduction, your bank rate, etc. So I could explain it really well because I always had a penchant for economics. So this is how I'm connecting my story to how somebody who's watching this should also look to connect their story and what interests them. So I was always interested in economics. I knew that. One part of me wanted to be an economist, try to be in research, start finding those answers to big questions, etc. I started with treasury simply because it paid me, right? And
Yeah.
it also gave me enough to keep myself engaged. But very interestingly, Ripple, the skill that I learned during that first phase of my career, which is what I would attribute to one of my biggest parts of success, you laugh at me if I say it's sales. People in our community hate the word sales because it's for somebody else's to do, right?
Yeah.
We are here sitting in an office crunching numbers, telling people what to do. That's what most of what risk managers think. A, they're away from clients. B, they're away from the demands of bringing in revenue, etc. But trust me, to be successful in any field, one of the best skills you can learn early on is sales. So if anybody watching here is getting a chance to start in any sales, please do. Eventually, there'll come a time those skills you will apply in your area of interest. Coming back, it's what taught me to handle rejections. It's what taught me to connect the dots, go down to the level of what people wanted from me. It doesn't matter even if I could recite big books. If I cannot talk to the level that you understand, nothing I do is ever going to matter. Right? So, your people skills, your resilience, and ability to handle rejection came from the first part of my career. Of course, I also learned the technical skills, right? That kept happening because I was already analytical, academically oriented. Some of those started to make sense. So, no longer when someone asked me, there is a rate cut, how does it impact? It was not a bookish response anymore. I started really looking at it from the perspective of what it meant for my client. Back then, it was from a interest rate hedging perspective. That was a main part of my job, right? Your swaps, your derivatives, what makes sense, etc. So a lot of my advisory then started becoming and started evolving from an economist view to a practical view. So to people who again are preparing themselves for either industry or any roles, right? The key thing to look at is if you're starting fresh, it's okay to just know your theory. Absolutely fine. But please try and relate to some real world examples. Connect it to something you read in the paper. That's going to engage your interviewer. The interviewer knows you come with not much of experience and we are okay with it. But what we are looking for is not someone who can only stick and limit themselves to the book. Even if you can apply four things from the book, you become very malleable to me with zero experience. Okay. Another part of preparation for someone starting from ground zero, do some projects. What do I mean? Try internships, try assisting someone, or take a mock project from somewhere if you're highly into data, analytics, etc. You then start really understanding what do I mean by probability of default. Where is it exactly impacting? A variable, a set of variable that you choose, you're not choosing only because of its information ratio, but you're choosing because there's some intrinsic understanding to why this will be an indicator of someone whether they'll pay me back or not. Right? So do some project based learnings. When you go to your interviews or in your one pages, be confident to talk enough about such projects. That's where your reality comes out, right? So, in a very hyper competitive space where everybody is doing CFA, the market is looking for candidates who can apply, and a nice way to project that you can apply is doing it in any one area. It's highly unlikely I get two CVs where both of them have done the same projects or the same learnings or the same experience. Now you start becoming unique to me when you come into an interview room. The third
Understood.
question you asked me, is this a CFA or FRM? It really depends upon what interests you. For me, I was just bored. I wanted to learn more. When I began FRM, it looked like my career was pivoting towards risk. So I said, okay, why not? Let me try and see what exactly risk has to offer. Now, risk is an area that's also there within CFA, right? But purely speaking, CFA talks about looking at investments. So you're trying to drive income, be it from an investment banking perspective, asset management perspective. The game is I give you capital, how much return you can get. And the third part of that question is how do I protect capital, right? Or for every additional return I make, what's the additional risk? So risk comes third. But it so happened that my career was organically evolving in the direction of risk. I felt probably I should learn some more. And I just deep dove simply because I wanted to see what exactly did risk have to offer. So I opened that window. Then came everything else, which I had no idea about, right? I'm not ashamed to ever admit I don't know something. And that goes back to one of the key skills in my line of business, which means you need to want to learn more. Okay. But the moment that opened up, I then said, I'm not happy being only in credit. By that time, I'd moved to credit, right? People often ask me this question, if you're in treasury, how did you even get your foot through the door for credit? Very important question. And I'd like to answer that for the audience today. Every time you apply for a job, make yourself relevant for what the JD wants in whatever way. Nobody says you need to be, you need to misrepresent. That's not what we are saying. But if I'm genuinely going to tell you, Ripple, I'm interested in credit.
Yeah.
And if I can't show in that pager that I send across to an interviewer that I understand A, B, and C of credit, either in terms of its life cycle, or let's say if we're talking in modeling, the key three variables, or some of the basic models that go into those variables, if it's not in your CV, how do I even find you to be relevant? So don't be afraid to keep pivoting. So what I did, I pivoted. I said I understand credit. I did a project during my college. I put that left, right, center when I had to go to the interview. Even if it was 3 months, it didn't matter. My interview was all about did I know enough of that area? And the interviewers were convinced. In fact, they saw my treasury skill as an additional good to have, which none of the other credit people in the team had.
Yeah.
Then came a moment in my credit journey where I said, this is getting very monotonous for me, right? Of course, there's a whole career of deep diving, but I think I like to explore some more. That comes from a place of me knowing myself better. And that's what I implore audience to do. Keep learning about yourself, knowing your interests better, and start applying and asking those questions. Okay, what does this mean for me? Where should I take my next pivot, right? Frankly, when I was in credit, I saw my job being replaced in less than 4 years because you had enough automation, right? A big part of my work then involved writing your credit assessment memorandum. Today, when I talk to analysts who used to do my job, they very surely tell me 70% of the work I manually used to do is already done by systems. So I was right. I took a bet, right?
Yeah.
But when I switched to consulting, I knew nothing about consulting. But I knew a few things about myself, which is A, making myself relevant for the job. B, I was not afraid to learn or admit I didn't know something. And C, I was able to say, these are my skills, but tell me what more you need. I will be able to learn that and deliver, which brings me to that's what is super critical for a consultant.
Understood. See, those are really, really great points. And I would advise anyone who is an early career aspirant to listen to the 3-4 minutes of advice that was given, right? I think that is just excellent of how someone in the early career should be approaching for a career in finance and risk. So, coming from that, you mentioned regarding your switch from treasury to credit. I know there are many professionals who are working in perhaps market risk and want to move to credit, or from credit risk to perhaps treasury, right? And the general sense is that if I'm an expert in one domain, why would anyone else take me in their domain, right? And how you mentioned that your interviewers thought that your treasury skill is an asset because no one else in their team has that skill set.
Yes.
So, what really helped you in that switch? Was it that you had some background in credit risk, like working on a project, or when you were discussing with the interviewer, you were able to show that you had the conceptual understanding of the credit risk? And they can train you like in 2-3 months. All companies have excellent training programs if anyone wants to learn, right? So,
Yeah.
what mattered the most over there? How much your enthusiasm and your in depth perhaps understanding, not as much knowledge, helped there?
So here's where your network is going to play a key role, right?
Yeah.
You need to pick up the phone or find someone in your peer group, first of all, who's already doing the job. Okay?
Yeah.
Pick up the phone and ask them, yeah, आपका day-to-day job में what exactly do you do?
Yeah.
Take notes, go back, think if I know those, or how should I learn to do those? What are the 3 key or 4 things that start mattering? In my own example, I did exactly that. I had someone in my peer who was doing the job, picked up the phone and asked them, and I started to realize a lot of it had to do with your ratios, understanding it, right? Your
Yeah.
liquidity ratios, your solvency ratios, something I didn't touch in treasury. But I know, right? Everyone who is a finance aspirant, risk aspirant knows this. But is it relevant? Do I use it in day to day of treasury? No, I don't. In treasury, all I'm monitoring, for example, at least in the Indian market, are things like your FX or your derivatives or what sort of hedging solutions should I give? At least that was my line of business, right? But if I'm going to expect to be asked on FX or interest rate in a credit interview, I'm the stupidest person there, right? Which means first I need to challenge myself to say, what exactly is an interviewer expecting out of someone who's successful in this role? Ask that peer. Once you know that, refresh your memory for all those things that is relevant. Okay? Then think about what have you done in the past that's relevant and you can highlight in your CV. Bring forward. See, even within 1 year of experience or even 0 years of experience, right after college, right? We've all touched X number of subjects. We've all done X number of group projects. Or we've done something on the side that really excited us and that is valuable. But when you read a JD or when there is a role, you need to go down that memory lane to say what is relevant for that particular instance. A one pager is a snapshot that's relevant for that instance. If I'm submitting another one pager to another company, it doesn't mean I'm a different person. It's a different flavor of me. It's a different part of what I know because
Yeah.
we all know oceans, all of us for that matter, right? So now that I've looked at it from that lens, anything that I've done in credit started coming up in my CV. So obviously in my CV, the treasury part is there. That's my true and real experience, right? But instead of writing 8 bullets on everything on treasury, I reduce it to 2 and I start talking about credit. Even if it is just a small project, that's not real life, that's outside the scope of my day to day work. It shows to the interviewer that you are not a frog in the well. You are willing to explore. Now that I know what's on his mind, I'm well prepared to talk about those ratios or how it's used in a credit assessment or how do I view it from the lens of evaluating somebody's ability to repay. And they came apart in the interview where they started asking me questions on compliance, which is purely treasury related, that only a senior credit professional of 20 years experience knows, but a fresh graduate of credit will not know. And that comes from my treasury experience, right? For example, the cutoff of net worth that you need to have for you to have a certain amount of exposure or to
Yeah.
be able to do some trades, etc. Eventually, I got my job and I got it allocated clients which are heavy on treasury. Things like your FX, which are very difficult for a normal credit analyst to evaluate. So that then becomes an add on. But you can't expect an interviewer to do that for you because your step one is getting your one pager relevant. Step two is anchoring the conversation to say, look, that's where my experience is, but I'm also interested here. So why don't we talk about it?
Understood. Understood. See, one of the things that you mentioned is networking, right? So, fear of missing out, right? FOMO. I have a term called FORO, fear of reaching out. And that's actually negative. So sometimes, people feel that if they're reaching out to their colleague in any other department, they might ask a stupid question. What will they think about, that question? If someone is struggling to reach out, even knowing that reaching out might help them in the next step, what is your suggestion in this regards?
In simple English, I find people who find it difficult to ask but easy to give. That's how we are all grown up, right?
Yeah.
कि देना अच्छा है. You need to help others, should not ask help. So the way to break this mentally is if there is a job posting in your team, start finding your network to say, yaar, ye hai, can I help you? The moment you do that, you get comfortable in talking to people from a position of a giver.
Okay.
Then you feel, okay, now that I have given, somebody else there owes me to give back. So if you're finding it difficult to break that shyness, anxiety, ki what will they think? Start giving first.
Understood. I mean, that's a great piece of advice. So, if anyone is out there and you are struggling to make that message and send it over for networking, if you are struggling to share what you have perhaps worked on in your own time, like a project, please listen to this advice. Start helping people. Start offering what you have to offer, and that way you can eventually get into this cycle of better networking than
And
you
the
are doing.
key part of networking, Ripple, is it should not be transactional.
Okay.
I'm not doing it just because I need something. It might
Okay.
be why I'm reaching out, right? That's
Okay.
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 But if we are going to look at it myopically only for that instance, then that's where people lose the game. Okay.
How?
So I need something from you. I ask you something today. Okay. 2 years later, I remember you for something. Nothing really hurts in just pinging you and asking that again, right? How are you doing today? Where are you at your career? I saw that you have done something like this, right? It's not just about everybody's connected in LinkedIn or Facebook or your WhatsApp group. So it's not just about that congratulations. Take that moment to really celebrate, probably by giving them a DM.
Yeah.
Say that this is very inspiring. Be genuine. So your starting point could have been because you needed something from that other person, but you have made a decision for yourself that that networking is not going to be simply because you needed something, but you're going to be a giver more holistically, right? Anyone who starts from that perspective of being a giver or just someone who reflects that positivity in general, I've always seen them to get more than what they began.
Yeah. So,
Empirical observation.
in general, be a good person.
Not even that generic, right?
Yeah.
You can be a bad person, frankly, but not
So
in
it's like
networking.
scripted. It's like scripted. You can actually plan this. That's
Yeah.
how easy it is, right?
Yes. It need not be one for you, one for me. It's not quid pro quo.
Yeah.
Sometimes, maybe for one person, all you're doing is giving. And there could be some persons from whom all you're doing is taking. Net on net, it does help keep the overall environment better. So don't look at it as one on one to optimize. Just be someone who can give.
Understood. I mean, that's really great. And professionals who are starting on their journey, especially people who are client facing and people who have to interact with a lot of people. This is a really great advice. So coming back to one of the things that we discussed is application of technology, right? What core skill sets do you see emerging in your domain in terms of SAS or Python or R? There are many programming languages. There are many tools. With this, large language models are coming into picture. How is your team effectively using those? Do you have any advice? Because these things are not talked about a lot, but these are always helping people increase their efficiency. The people who know how to use LLMs properly, right? Alongside that, what is the core technical skill in terms of coding that could be helpful to have a successful career in your domain?
Right. Fair question, Ripple. So when I use the word technical, I'm really careful, right? I'm not really a fan of people calling Accenture as a technology company. We're the world's largest management consulting. And the reason is we are problem solvers. We use technology for it. That's my starting point. To your question of observations of market trends in technology, frankly, it doesn't matter what the technology is. What you need is that mindset to crack open. Okay. What do I mean? Interactions with AI, Gen AI, LLMs, all important, right? Nobody's saying no. But what's the market reality? Credit has been a very mature area, right? Credit risk in particular. Banks have been doing whatever they do in their ways of working, and they're set in their ways for like many decades now, right? But they have a real pressure in doing it better, doing it faster, doing it cheaper. So you are at an inflection point automatically, right? When you're helping anybody to move from A to B, in other words, making a change, as someone who's helping them, I need to know both A and B, right? So it will be very narrow of me to say everything is in the new, please only learn open source languages, let's all learn LLM. No, that's not sufficient, right? we're at an interesting juncture where technology is driving things. It's always been the case, but now we know it's AI, right? Specifically from credit, let's understand why SaaS is important, why people speak about it, right? Statistical analysis, at its core, most of the banks, the largest global banks, all of them use that as the software. They were almost near monopoly or duopoly, right? They had a lot of market share in enabling banks do the computations necessary either for risk capital or for their PD/LGD calculations and so on, right? Now there is pressure to adapt to open source. Why? It's simple, it's agile, it's flexible, it's scalable. So there is an advent, an ushering of a new wave of languages that you need to use, right? So anyone who's first of all able to understand the basics of credit is what at its core is required. A PD is PD whether SAS says it or Python says it or LLM says it. If you don't know PD, any of your isolated skills in SAS, isolated skills in Python, isolated skills in AI is useless without context, right? So context is king. Once you know that, again, I'll go back to there comes a question of how deep should I go, especially for an early career aspirant, right? Here's where I like to use the hack that I already mentioned. Take projects. Same project, try to do it in SAS, try to do it in Python. Now you'll know which is easier, what are the variables to look at, what the two variables or sorry, the screens are going to look at, etc. That becomes valuable for a bank who's on that journey. So connecting it to the market trend, the market trend that we generally observe is movement to more open source languages, pivoting to newer technologies. I shouldn't say cloud is new, but generally banks' adoptions of technology, especially in areas of risk, is slightly behind the curve vis-a-vis some other parts of the bank, right? So it's still new that way from a risk and a bank perspective, right? So from looking at the scenario where this movement is very actively happening, both of these skills become pertinent. So what's my happy area if I were an interviewer? I'd ideally want someone who understands both. But do I want a language expert? Do I want someone who knows SAS extremely well? Do I need to know someone who needs Python, every library out there? No. My fundamental job is in credit, right? So then I'm more likely to only look at those libraries, Python libraries, for example, that's very pertinent to give you an output that helps you compare between the two, right? So I would stop looking at things from a standalone technical skill perspective in isolation, rather look at it from the context of the role or the area of risk that you're aspiring for and how these tools become a how, right? The how part of the question, how do I implement it? Then comes the real game that makes it really engaging.
Understood.
The newer part of the technology again, which is AI and prompt engineering and everything, the phase of innovators is almost done, right? Now we are in that early adoption to pushing that adoption some more phase. Okay. So it is relevant to learn it, but if I were an aspirant, I would spend at least 20 to 30% of the time in new. 5 years down the line, that's going to be your day to day, not your Pythons and SAS. But for you to start today from level 0, you still need those. So if I have a study plan of 8 hours or whatever number of days, right, I would devote 60% of my time to technologies that are already mature, well entrenched in the market, and are relatively showcasing those trends of change. So in this example, 30% to SAS, 30% to Python. The remaining 40%, I will break it into anything on AI, what of AI is already adopted, and 10% at least to what of AI nobody is thinking about today, but will become and has the potential to become big. That's how I would look at the view.
Understood. So before closing, I have some final questions. One is, suppose your interview for the switch from treasury to credit risk didn't go as well as it did. What would have your career look like right now, according to you? What would have been your plan in that situation?
I think one way or the other, I would have still landed in consulting, to be honest.
Why?
Because I'm a generalist. I like to call myself as a specialist of risk,
Okay.
but generalist within risk.
So how does that differ from someone who really wants to be a specialist? Like, how does your day-to-day work life differ from that kind of a person? And because this is very interesting point that you put forward. It depends a lot on figuring it out of what you are good at. So you know that you are good at generalizing, and you want to know everything, and then work on the consulting end of things. So
Mm-hmm.
how does it matter? How much interest plays a role in this, right? For example, someone wants to work in silos
Hmm.
and do a great job at making models, credit risk models, and predictive models. Would you still recommend that person to enter consulting, or would you recommend that person to first think about the expectations of the consulting world and then think about a long-lasting career?
It's a fairly loaded question, so I'll try to break it down.
Okay, okay, okay,
So, anywhere in consulting, no matter how much the world promises you to be a specialist in a particular area, you stand a risk of becoming a dinosaur too soon if you're looking at consulting.
okay,
Okay?
okay.
Because as an industry, it keeps pivoting to where the industry wants to go tomorrow, right? Which doesn't mean you'll be out of your job, but it means you may not have enough potential to keep deepening. If your lookout is to be in the depth of things, I want to dig deeper rather than become the breadth. At a very high level, a person's better off being in industry roles.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
Because your career path then becomes knowing one thing, two things, three things, digging 10 feet, 20 feet, 80 feet, and then, I don't know, 1,000 feet eventually, and starting to shape the thinking in that line. Okay?
Subject
You
matter
take,
expert.
yes, you become a real value and a specialist there. But the
Oh,
risk of that is you cannot really hedge against market job demands,
yeah.
right? It's a
Great point.
great endeavor,
Yeah.
but if, for example, God forbid, there is a um, layoff in your team or the bank or there is acquisition, whatever, there is going to be consolidation. And when there are two specialists, sometimes it just comes down to luck, right? Nothing about the person itself. So, speaking again purely from a risk perspective, you're not hedged enough, you're not diversified enough, right? So,
Yeah.
at a minimum, I would say, even if you want to specialize in your area, know a little bit beyond just your day to day work. If I'm a credit analyst and I want to only be in the line of credit, it's absolutely lovely. But please look at what others are also doing. Try your hands at a few other departments within credit. Credit's a huge world, right? And let's not try and be a one trick pony. Okay, that will be my key piece. For someone who wants breadth, again there are risks, right? You might become seen as someone who's a jack of all trades, master of none, right? So you do stand that risk as well.
Yeah.
Over diversified, right? Just as how we look at risk always. So for someone like me who's a consulting professional, along your career journey, you should also look to specialize in a few areas. It cannot just be knowing a little of everything. I should know something really deep. I
Okay.
should be called to the fore for one or two areas that I really stand for. But my advice becomes really valuable because I know few others also and I can think at it from a 360-degree lens. So when you grow as a generalist, it is still important to be a specialist, but to how depth and what areas is a pertinent question. If you are a specialist, as you grow, you still need to broaden your horizon. So it's a T shape, no matter how you look, but it just makes a difference of where you start on the T. I began on the breadth and then started doing the depth. Some people could do the depth and then start doing the breadth. Because ultimately, if your goal is to become a really senior person in the corporate ladder, let's all face it, all departments are like a pyramid, right? The space at the top is a lot less than what's at the bottom. So the person who knows the most and who is most valuable to drive decisions on the ground is going to make the difference.
Understood. Understood. Thank you very much. So, my last question to you is, if you had to share one single thing that you think matters the most to have a successful career for early career aspirants, for people who are already in the industry, what would that be? Just one advice that you think everyone should keep in mind.
Eternal learning.
Okay.
You just got to learn, right? You can never be sure you know everything to survive a career. The pace of change is really rapid.
Okay.
So, if you are able to build that muscle of looking at learning as engaging beyond just what marks say or beyond just what your relatives might say, but if you look at learning as something that you are able to get up in the morning excited about, that's going to future proof your career forever, irrespective of where you land.
Understood. That's great. So, thank you very much for coming to this episode, and thanks everyone for watching. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments, and we'll try to get them to Nivetha and try to answer. Community members, you already probably know Nivetha from the community. Feel free to interact. Feel free to post your questions. The more we bring good questions forward from everyone's journeys, the better impact we can make overall for everyone in the community. That's what I believe. And never hesitate from asking questions. Thank you.
Thank you
So,
very much for having me today, Ripple.
yeah, for sure. Thank you